we're here to talk about the Heaven and Earth grocery store, which I hope all of you have and are reading currently or have read already. It's genius work. But before, a page turner, yes. But before we get into that, I actually was hoping we could talk a little bit more about The Color of Water, which was your first book, because it's definitely one of the most important books I've ever read, and as we know, it's required reading all over the country. And obviously, it's an exploration of, well, your mother's history and a love letter to your mother of sorts, but it feels so connected to this latest novel. So I was hoping we could kind of talk a little bit about that.
Okay. All right.
That was it. That was the prompt.
Well, sure. Is there anything specific or?
Well, specifically, the grocery store. I think that if everyone here has read The Color of Water, they know there's an important grocery store that your mom grew up in.
Well, when I went to research that book, this is going back to 1980 or 81. I wanted to find out where the grocery store was. My mother used to talk about it, and then when I went to it, there was a McDonald's there, but there was a little house right behind the McDonald's, and so I knocked on the door, and I'm sorry about the sound. I don't know what to tell you. Can you hear that? Okay. Well, after I knocked on the door, an old black man answered the door, and I said, I'm sorry to bother you, but I was wondering if you knew anything about what was here before the McDonald's. And he said, oh, yeah, that's where the Shilskys lived. And we talked, and then I told him, I said, well, Ruth Shilsky, he didn't know who Ruth Shilsky was. She was known as Rachel Shilsky. I said, well, that's my mother. And he was like, boing. He was like, and so one thing led to another, and I ended up, talking to a lot of people in the neighborhood. In those days, Suffolk hadn't been developed yet. Apparently, it's been developed since then, and there were a lot of the old Jews there who still remembered my mother and my grandmother and my grandfather and the whole family. And so I had a chance to talk to them and find out what life was like for them back in the 20s and 30s. And so that knowledge of how that store was run and operated and the kind of things they had to do to survive was good business, but most of it didn't make it into the book, The Color of Water, because when you write a book, you only use 10% of what you got, really. So that was stored in my head, and I suppose I've always had some kind of interest in American history as it revolves around Jewish people, in part because of my grandmother and the difficulty she had in her life. She didn't speak English. She spoke Yiddish. Anti-Semitism was rampant in that part of Virginia. I remember a fellow by the name of Rubenstein took me around and showed me parts of town where Jews couldn't live, and they had signs that said, no Jews, no dogs, no niggers. And they meant it, So that was always, and if I said the N-word and you offended, I don't care. I think really what I came away from it was the knowledge that there's a lot about American history that most Americans, in fact, even most Jewish people, really don't understand or appreciate. And I thought this book was an opportunity for that to happen. Now, that wasn't intentional. It just was when Shona, or Chana, if you will, appears, that character, just the whole business of that story just happened to land in my imagination when Moshe was going through the business of being broke. For those of you who haven't read the book, this Jewish theater owner, he's broke, he thinks Mickey Katz, he rolls the dice, and it's not working out. Right. So when he steps into the store and sees Shona, spinning the yellow dye into the butter, Cupid, it's just, and you can't walk into in novels, scenes have to happen somewhere, but you can't just drop scenes, because otherwise it just sounds like, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. So once he falls into the basement of that store and meets this extremely beautiful, quote unquote, disabled young woman, a lot of really wonderful things start to happen, both for him and for me as the arbitrator of his story. So that's how the store got folded into the book. The book was not meant to be about a store. The book was meant to be about a camp. But every time I tried to write about the camp, it just didn't read well. So I just went with the store. And when he falls in, when you write about love, you have to be careful, because if it's not real, you know it. You, the guy or the gal or the they, whatever you call yourself, you know that it's not working. But with them, it was working instantly. Also, the fact that she was so-called, special and disabled, it really meant, it gave a special power to the whole business of their love, because people who are disabled, so-called disabled, really they're like witnesses at their own lynching, where everyone gets to make a speech about them but them. And so, having worked at this camp for so-called disabled children, it changed my life in terms of my perspective as to how people who are seen as not normal, how they really are.
So this was the camp that you mentioned as being one of the starters for this novel.
Right, the camp was donated. The camp was on land donated by a Romanian Jewish theater owner named Leo Pozel, who was from Philly, and he bought it in the 30s. Now, if you go outside of Philly in the 1930s, you're not going to find a whole bunch of Jewish people unless you make it to Pittsburgh. So this, and Cy, who ran the camp, who was Jewish. The camp was basically run by a Jewish board of trustees who were basically theater owners, who were well-meaning men, very practical, and had a different mentality than I know there's only 3 or 4 Jewish people here, but they had a different mentality than most Jewish people have now. They were very practical people. And so while the camp was started mostly for Jewish kids with polio, when other kids started to show up, they didn't say go away, they admitted them. And then when black kids started to show up, well, they're from Philly too. And so the camp became it became what every place should be, where people just show up and they're treated kindly.
Right.
So.
Well, it's so interesting because that same feeling exists in this store with Shona or Hana. This kind of radical acceptance maybe, or this non-judgmental attitude that she has, this kind of like love that she has for her fellow humans. Which I think really comes across.
Well, Malachi, who makes an appearance in this book, is probably, there are other ancillary characters. Everyone has, represents something else. And Malachi really represents, he even though he's not there a lot, he says a few things that are really important. One of which is that he says, this country is too dirty for me. I can't stand what I'm seeing. And you don't want to knock the reader over the head with this, because as soon as you write a book that says take your medicine, 3/4 of your readers get up and leave the room, including me. So, but what he does say, what he's trying to say, is that there are lots of things about America that are not so great. And that when you accept those things as accept that part of the culture, the part of your culture that you're leaving behind is the treasure. And so Malachi was really representing that, because there are certain elements of American life that we have accepted that are not so great. Right. So, everything needs to connect in a book. And if the book is right, then the right people will show up and make the connection.
There's a beautiful constellation of characters speaking to that point. And Malachi, well, I guess Malachi doesn't say this, but in the opening scene of the novel, there's a moment where a mezuzah has been found along with a dead body. and the mezuzah was on a pendant. Obviously, we know mezuzahs because there's no Jews here in the crowd. We don't know, but mezuzahs adorn the doors, right, for protection and safety. And this was one that would be worn as a pendant. And I guess Malachi doesn't say it, but the narrator in that scene says that a Jewish life is portable. Right? Isn't that the line? And I feel like as an opener to this novel that really has so much to do with that, with this kind of, well, where we locate home or where we even locate America. I mean, you're speaking to that now, but there's a lot of kind of up Chicken Hill is where we're located in the book, but there's a lot what's up on the hill and what's down on the hill, like where America is. That's a big conversation, I feel.
Right. Yeah, when Moshe wants to move down to where the Americans are, she says, which American?
Right.
I mean, we have this conversation now. I don't want to preach at anybody about what they should and should not do and should not feel. That's not my job is to illuminate and show and let the reader decide what's right and what's wrong and what works and what doesn't. But the fact is that I'm sure this story has happened somewhere in the world. And I'm sure that kindness and the moral fiber and fabric of most of these characters is the guiding light that makes us a better place. I mean, it's easy to say that in a nice clean room where the walls are nice and all this, that, and the other, but in your own life, in your own space, when you do that, then it really counts. And that's why Shona and Malachi and Nate and Isaac are important. Right. Because they, in their own space, they do things. Also, I found it fascinating that, in those years, Jews were among the newer immigrants, and nobody really wanted them around. And I think that that's a feeling that I'm not sure that I can't say that people don't understand it, but I'm not sure that people really understand what that feels like. Because anti-Semitism is very, very old. And when I first researched The Color of Water, I just couldn't. My mother would talk about it, but she was so. My mother was a gruff person. Asking me questions, get out. She didn't. But when I went to Suffolk and I saw it for myself, what it was like, I understood a lot better what the feeling was. And I'm not sure that the wider world, wider American world really understands that well. Because I suppose maybe black people do, I suppose, but there's something to be said about the idea that you're never really quite home, and there's always something that somebody can pull out at some point, a spear, and just chuck it at you for no reason. For reasons they don't even understand, because somebody told them.
Right.
So this was a place to explore that too. It was just, it was a good world to be in. I really enjoyed that world, even though it was, had some difficult moments.
Yeah, I'm curious to speak a bit more about that in your research for The Color of Water, seeing signs, no Jewish people, no black people, no dogs, and having this kind of personal history that you were discovering as well. I just feel as a writer, you, in this book in particular, are highlighting some of the sort of the connective tissues between the black community and the Jewish community, the kind of, even perhaps a Jewish life is portable, thinking about migration and diaspora and kind of the connections there. And I just putting these characters right on top of each other on Chicken Hill and in this community, you're highlighting some of the ways that we share common history and commonalities in a moment where maybe what you're pointing to is that sort of the differences get more highlighted perhaps, or the contentious points are more highlighted.
Well, you can make money that way. And there are people at this festival that make money that way. Really?
Yeah.
Sure, you can make a lot of money talking about how different we are. It takes a true artist to show our commonality. It takes the courage of a Kurt Vonnegut to show our commonality. You can go ahead and you can write and say, oh, the Italians, these, Irish, I'm half German, but I mean, that means nothing to me.
Right.
I don't care what race you are. I don't care what your religion is either. I mean, people use race and religion like a baseball bat, and they just bat people around with it until they get what they want. And you don't see when you go to Africa, as as hard as it is for the wildlife to live there. You don't see lions and zebras and giraffes, kicking each other around for a larger percentage. I just don't understand it. So, in terms of Black-Jewish relations, I've often been like, oh, this is the guy who could tell the God.
Sorry.
What do I know?
Not trying to put you in that.
I can't even balance my checkbook. I don't know anything about. But I mean, I've just met decent people of all types, and you try not to judge people. My mother never judged people. She understood what it was like to be on the bottom rail, I suppose. She wasn't a judgmental type person. She didn't really feel that she was qualified to judge other people, even though she really was kind of judgmental. She wasn't like, she felt like, at bottom that everybody's pretty much the same, and that if someone's on television, like if someone was talking on a politician, she'd say, look at him, he's never missed a meal. Look at him talk.
Right.
He doesn't even know what he's talking about. And she didn't know what she was talking about, but she had the right idea. And so you can find a million ways to make an excuse about why you don't care for your fellow man. I just ain't the guy to be in the room when you're doing it, because I'm just not interested. What have you done, today, yesterday, tomorrow, to make the world around you a little bit better? That's what gets me out of bed in the morning.
Well, and you can feel it in this book. I think one of the really beautiful relationships that we see is between Dodo and Monkey Pants, who I don't want to give away the whole book, but basically they're differently abled in terms of their ability to communicate, right? And they find this common way to communicate with each other.
Right.
Or not common, but they find a way to communicate with each other.
Yeah, well, I mean, I saw that when I was working at the Variety Club camp, I saw that all the time. The kids didn't, the differently able, thank you for giving me that term. I'll try to remember it next time.
I was just trying it out. I thought it might work.
You have to be careful what you say these days. You say one thing, it's like, oh boy. I mean, that's it. Kill them all. But when I worked at Variety Club camp, all the kids they had ranges of disability. Some were extremely disabled, others weren't. They just got along. They were looking to have fun. And the important thing is to try to have fun. And so these kids were trapped in an institution and these institutions existed in this country for hundreds of years, where if someone wasn't like everyone else, they just stuck them in this place. And I think at some point, there's a character named Miggy Flood, who is the oracle of the low gods. And she gives a long treatise about Pennhurst. And I was hoping that someone like that would appear, because books don't really, novels, they carry their own. They're like the Titanic, They have to weave around the iceberg, and if someone's not paying attention, then it's over. So they move in their own direction, but I was glad that someone appeared who could explain to not only to Nate and the people from the Hill, but explain to the reader what Pennhurst was and what it meant to be like that. And at some point she says, I can't remember. Something, they see the truth, and for that they are punished. And so people who are disabled or differently abled, that's their tribe. Their tribe is not racial or ethnic or cultural. Their tribe is that they are human beings who are treated and perceived as less than whole.
I guess speaking a little bit to your point about a novel being like the Titanic, which I've never heard, and that's so intense and amazing. I guess I want to ask you, and I'm sure everyone wants to hear a bit more about your process. You've talked a lot about going to Suffolk to do research for The Color of Water. I guess I think we'd just love to know more about how you get to work on a novel, how you set out with the story when it starts, and
Well, I mean, I'm not one of these people. I really don't know what I'm doing. I mean, you know, I read a lot of history books. I just read them for pleasure, and biographies and autobiographies, that kind of stuff. And then I just try to figure out what am I trying to say in a deeper way. And if I can figure out what I'm trying to say in a deeper way, I try to find a character that will kind of personify that story, that thing. And I mean, Heaven and Earth Grocery Store is really about equality. It's really about Cy Friend, who was a gay Jewish man in Philadelphia in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, who really had nowhere to go. And so he rose up the ranks in this camp and created his own little world, which was just a marvelous place. Just, he's still alive. I just saw him about a month ago. I mean, and
you dedicated the book to him. He knows that, right?
yeah. Well, I've been trying to write this book for years, and I wanted to do it before he keeled over, and I did it. I mean, yeah, I wrote it for him, and he got he had the pleasure of seeing it, and he loved it, and he's a very direct person. He was a principal in Philadelphia for years, and he dealt with a lot of stuff that he didn't want to deal with, but he did it all for the kids. And, they used to have a marathon in Philly where they'd have Joey Bishop and Monty Hall, and these guys would come and they'd get on TV for 20 hours and raise money for these kids. Cy never went to that. Couldn't stand it. Because they'd take the little girl, and they'd float her up there, and he couldn't stand that. Because the cute little girl would become 16, nobody was interested in her. But if she was 16 at Cy's camp, he made her into a counselor until she was 19 or 20, long before. They'd arrest him now if he ran a camp like that.
Right.
Really, because we were going hikes on the highway with trucks whizzing by. He just made sure they lived.
Right.
Because he wanted them to feel equal, because he felt they were equal. So ultimately, the book was about equality. And so Moshe, I wrote the first chapter of this book, which is the chapter after the italics, and that was stuck way in the middle of the book about the camp. And I decided the book about the camp wasn't any good. It was just trite. It was just one of those corny books. I just threw it all away, and I just pulled that chapter out, and I just dealt with Moshe. That's how it happened.
Wow. Do you have is that common, I guess? Like, are there a lot of discarded books that never make it?
I got 2 or 3 sitting there that they're not very good yet, and they'll sit there for years, and then I'll go back to them, and it depends on what I'm trying to say, There's a couple like that, yeah.
So the goal with this book was to talk about equality or to highlight it.
Well, I mean, how do I say this? The goal in this book was to show people that we have much more in common than we are different. Mm-hmm. Most of my books go to that. But to do it in a way that there's a song, and the song has a kind of melody that you can whistle after the band leaves. I mean, that's the problem with a lot of music now. It's all created by computers. You go to the movies, you see a guy's score, you see what the guy has written, you see he's got computers and all that. That's not music. I mean, the great Sammy Cahn said it best when they asked him about Janet Jackson's book. Janet Jackson's song "Control" was a pop song. Sammy Cahn listened to it. He said, "Well, I wish I'd written it because the song has melody." Now, it's not my favorite song, but it has melody that lasts. And so, when you're writing a book, you're looking for how this melodic thing can last over 200 or 300 pages.
Well, that was a great segue / you already started to answer it. I wanted to talk about the fact that you were a musician, or are a musician, but professionally a musician for 9 years, I think. Was it saxophone?
Yeah, I still play. Yeah, I was a musician for a long time, full time. Played in the clubs and stuff. Play Hava Nagila in every key. Played a million weddings. I played a bunch of weddings. I played a wedding one time where John Kennedy was there, and like Junior, and I was out. This was out in Long Island somewhere. What do they call it? The Hamptons, where you go way out. You just keep driving. You just keep driving. Anyway, I was out sitting on a wall, and I was warming up, and this guy came. Like I was sitting here, and he came, and he was sitting over there, and I looked up, and he said, "Oh man, I love the saxophone. How long you been playing?" I was chatting with him, and then we went inside. We were playing, and then when he was dancing on the floor, somebody said, "That's John Kennedy." I said, "Oh yeah, I was just talking to him. Wow." But yeah, so music. I mean, music and literature are a little different. I mean, they're just different languages, but when they're done well, they do the same thing.
Right. I mean, my question was really going to be, were there similarities in as you're writing music or playing music or improvising music to when you find yourself writing a story like this?
Not really. I mean, well, when you're writing music now, you have to use a computer. Yeah, I mean, you just have to like stare at a screen and, using Finale or whatever software. You have to. You don't have to, but if you're doing it professionally, you have to, because nobody puts music on. No one writes music and hands it to someone and says write it out. And it just doesn't happen now. So with a blank page, you have a song is a story, and a novel is a story. But there are few songs that are novels. I mean, John Coltrane, Leonard Cohen, some of those people, they wrote novels in song. Most songwriters don't do that. They just can't. Novels give you space to explore, the intricacies and the delicate moments of life that a song will touch on. And even wade through and softly, but a song doesn't allow you to jump from one lily pad to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. There's no space, unless it's like I said, it's like a Leonard Cohen piece or one of Coltrane's later pieces that demand listening. That sounds like to most people like junk, or someone like Puccini or someone like Clifford Brown or someone some of the great jazz people from the 40s and 50s, where if you listen, you realize that, oh my God, he's really saying. Sonny Rollins is one. But you have to be really, really into music to appreciate that. Whereas a novel is more accessible.
Well, it does feel like a song, your novel. It's very melodic, but also there's so much music in it. Like there's the theater where you have all of these bands that are coming to play. There's Malachi the dancer, of course.
Well, I love Malachi. I already spoken about, but
Yeah.
the whole business of jazz and promoters and theaters and musicians, the relationship between those, which I witnessed some in my life, and both in California and in New York, that relationship between the talent, quote unquote talent, and the talent keepers is very complicated. And so, and that too is rife with misunderstanding and prejudicial beliefs and so forth. Right. Very rarely do you hear about the producer or the theater owner who pays the band when no one shows up. Right. Very rarely do you hear about the producer who who stayed with the act long after he or she was done, and stuck it out with them, and then just lost it all. Similarly, I mean, the fact is that most musicians and artists from the 30s and 40s never made a lot of money from their music. And the music publishing industry is rife with just awful people. So, and those awful people, they laid their evil on whoever came in the door, regardless as to what color they were. So there's that. But what I wanted to show with Moshe was that his decency and his kindness lasted long after he died. And I talk about it in the end of the book, where this camp where these kids went to, that camp still exists. Leo Pozell, who wandered out into the suburbs of Philadelphia with a pocket full of change, Romanian, and everyone knows the Romanians are crazy, and I don't mean that. If you're part Romanian, I don't mean that. But Romanians were they were wanderers,
Right.
and they were. When I say they, I mean they were known to be wanderers. They were known to be talented in theater, singing, and Yiddish theater. And if you've ever listened to klezmer music or seen Yiddish theater, some of this stuff is really good. I mean, well, I'll put it this way. I mean, I can't do it. So when you're kind to people, it lasts long after you're gone. And that part of life in America is not really talked about very much. I think Joe Biden's a great man. That's what I think, and I'm proud to say it. I mean, he's guy, and people are talking about how old he is. I don't care how old he is. I don't care if he's in a walker. He has experience and empathy. The guy lost his son. He's served this country. And then we're talking about, I'm proud to say he's a great man. And I don't care what you call me, because I'm a Democrat, whatever. It doesn't matter. You have to be good to people. You have to be kind. You have to show what America really is. Because I'm waiting for someone to stand up and say, I've had enough of this. So let me be the first. I have had enough. I've just had enough. So, what I tried to do in this book was to show that one of the great redeeming qualities of our country, and we have a lot of problems, and we're living in land. Right now, we're standing on land that belongs to someone else. And we're living in a country that belongs to someone else. We can't give it back. We can give back what they would have given back. That's all. And so the Heaven and Earth grocery store is just my attempt to show how good we are and have been, and how good we can be still. That's all it was. So, those are the lessons I learned in the course of my life as a young man, when I was working at Variety Club Camp, when I went to our common alma mater, Oberlin College, which is a great school, and I'm so grateful to Oberlin. We learned that while we can have differences, we can agree to disagree and still find the space to let everyone be who they are without being ding-dongs about it.
Right. No, I think the book very effectively also communicates that. There's a moment where, again, sorry to talk about Malachi again, but he says that he's talking about knowing who you are. He says that the black people in the U.S. know who they are at some point, speaking about Nate, and remembering who you are while still being able to communicate with others who are not.
Well, Malachi is a, he was a quote-unquote Orthodox Jewish person. I'm not sure he's same kind of Orthodox Jewish person that we see in New York a lot. That's
right.
A little bit, there's
very different.
There's some shades of difference there. But, and if we could talk about what is a Jew for the next 9 years and still, walk out of here saying, oh boy, but what Malachi's overwhelming quality is one of understanding and acceptance. And that's what makes him special. He tells his friend, and he loves Moshe, but he tells him, I'm not staying here. Right. But he comes back anyway. He comes back because World War II is coming. He sees the future and so forth. He sees what's about to happen. And this is not a man who, and this is important for readers to, and I wanted to impress this upon readers, that the prejudicial belief that Judaism is about money is just not true. I mean, I'm not a rabbi, I'm not a doctor. I don't play one on TV. But I can tell you this, that I studied enough of it to know that it's not about money. All good religions are not really about money. They're about love and family and compassion and sharing. Now, if society wants to plant that on you and you accept that for yourself, that's your problem. It's sort of like, can black people dance? Well, you haven't seen me dance, because I dance with one finger in the air like a white guy, So it doesn't, you can't accept, and I saw that throughout the course of my life. I saw how my mother was treated, and I saw how she saw herself. And how she was treated and how she saw herself are two different things. Yeah, I'd come home from school. I'd say, Mom, these people call me names. They call me nigger. She said, their names can't hurt you. You know who you are. Did you do your math homework?
Right.
Did you do that's all she wanted to hear about. Now, some of these things, she could have worked out better. But, a child watches what their parents do, not what they say. And I watched what my mother did. And my mother was always focused on the education and religion. That was her thing. She didn't want to hear anything outside of that. Whatever you had to do, you work out. You figure out a way to work it. And sometimes it didn't work out evenly. But it pretty much all worked. My siblings and I, we're still very close.
And there's 12 of you, right?
Well, there's 11 now. My brother
11.
Billy passed away. But yeah, we're still very close.
I wanted to ask you actually before we open it up maybe for questions, the role of faith, because I know you grew up with your mom in the Black church, right? Or they're in church consistently, but of course discovered this whole history of being Jewish.
Right.
I'm wondering, do you identify in any way with being Jewish besides culturally, or is there faith, or how do you feel about that?
Well, I'm Jewish from the neck up and I'm black from the neck down. No, I mean, no. No, actually, I'm Jewish from the neck down, black from the head up. No, I don't really, to be honest with you, my mother started a little Baptist church in Brooklyn. And I still work in there. I've been working in that church for the last, 11, 12 years. Every weekend, I'm there. And most of the time, I am not there on Sunday. I'm always there on Saturday because we run programs. I had a music program. We had that for years, and that's kind of faded. Now we have a program for asylum seekers. We're teaching them English. We're helping them get citizenship and so forth. These people are getting sent up to New York, and the mayor of New York, he's a great man, and he's a legend in his own mind. But so we are always active, and so I don't agree. I'm beyond the point in my life where I think that any religion is the best religion. I just take the principles from whatever religion that works, and I just work it for me. I am not interested in Jesus coming next Thursday at 4:30.
Right.
Really, I'm not. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it on Sunday. I want to see it on I want to see you at 4:30.
Right.
On Monday. So, I mean, so I'm not that religious the way I used to be. I mean, we grew up in the Black church because that's what we knew, and we went to church religiously, and it was good for us. There was a lot about it that my mother looked the other way, and there were things that she never let her daughters go into church with anybody that she didn't know really well, any man, no matter who it was. She was very, very funny about that. She was very cautious. I'm sorry, but she was religious to the end as a Christian person. She had a lot of respect for Judaism because after The Color of Water came out, she understood that her experience with Jewish life was not the real thing. Right. And so, and some of my older sisters, like my older sister Rosetta, I'd say she's pretty much Jewish.
Oh, wow. Okay.
She doesn't go to temple, but she's pretty much Jewish. She's always been. I mean, what is a Jew? I don't know, but Rosetta's Jewish. I mean, she's, it's not. I mean, it's not just her friends and the way. She was a social worker in New York for years. She went to Howard University on a scholarship through the Stephen Wise Synagogue in Manhattan. She was supposed to get a full scholarship. She failed it by like a point. It was like a point. She wrote a letter to them, and they sent her to college for 4 years. And then she wrote them that she needed a coat, and they gave her a coat. She never forgot that. Neither did my mother. So, but it's not that. It's just Rosetta's mentality is that of a Jewish person, and what that mentality is, please. She just her thinking and her perspective. She has no love for Christianity at all. She doesn't want to hear anything about it. She respects me for working in the church, and she'll help me if I need help, give me perspective and opinions that are usually right on. But she doesn't want to hear anything about Christian life, Christian principles, and so forth.
Thank you for sharing all of that. I think we probably have a couple of minutes for questions. If people want to ask, okay, we'll do you and then you, okay?
Thank you. She said, how come everyone isn't taking out $10 and passing it right up front? Right now, right this minute. She's just...
it was a very nice compliment and not a question.
Okay.
The question was about Deacon King Kong, another one of James's books, and the humanity that you find in each of the characters.
Well, I had a good time in Deacon King Kong making fun of the black church and the black community that I know so well. I look at it, with a sort of good-natured sort of, people mean well. I do the same thing in Heaven and Earth as well. Shul and Shona singing when she's not supposed to sing, and she's supposed to go upstairs. She's not going to go. She's davening downstairs. I don't care. And they make, okay, what, because there has to be flexibility. When there's love, there's flexibility. When there's none, there's no love, there's no flexibility. Think about that when you think about people who tell you what laws are and what is good and what is not. When someone's good, Barbara Bush was a wonderful person. She did more for books. She and Laura Bush did more for books in this country than most people ever gave them credit for. And I remember seeing her at some event. My mother came to one event that was public after The Color Water came out. It was at Lincoln Center because Barbara Bush wrote her a letter and said, come to this event. Because Mommy wasn't. My mother was not a public person. She came, and I was backstage with Mrs. Bush. And they gave an award to this Mexican woman for learning how to read. And they were behind a little scrim. And I heard these two ladies talking, and it sounded like they were like old friends. They said, well, you can't, when you cook the such and such and such. And I pulled it back. It was Mrs. Bush talking to this Mexican woman who had learned to read, and they were talking like two old friends. And when my mother went to Mrs. Bush's house, she knocked on the door. Mrs. Bush opened the door. Said, Ruth, how are you? And they were friends until my mother died.
Wow, that is.
And I've been a friend to the Bush Literacy Foundation ever since. I was so, I guess I say that to say, we are all the same. You can make a lot of money saying how different we are, but we are all pretty much the same. And those are the principles that both of those women, all three of them, including the middle-aged Mexican woman we learned, that's what they live by. That's why we read books. We're reading books to find that ground.
Absolutely. That says it all. Yes. Hi.
Well, thank you. I would add that a lot of the research for this book came from Pittsburgh. A lot of the first-person accounts that I drew from came from Pittsburgh, Jewish people who lived in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh has a very large Jewish community, and it's obviously suffered tremendously in the last few years. So that was very helpful. The Heinz Library out there, the Carnegie Heinz Library out there was very helpful in terms of research.
Barbara. The question was how you were able to refine the Yiddish expression so well.
Oi. I don't know. I
Oi.
mean, we did a lot of work. We knew, when I say we, me and the editor and I knew that, that Jewish woman would be reading this book. Look, you haven't lived. When A Color of Water came out, I did, it wasn't a big success. It became successful because Jewish women read books. And you haven't lived until you've been to like a coffee klatch in Teaneck, New Jersey with 10 Jewish women, and they said, let's check his teeth. Wait a minute, So I knew it had to be like on the dot. We worked really hard to get the Yiddish right, or close to right.
Beautiful. We have 10 seconds, yes.
I don't even know if I have another book in me. I mean, I look at some of the old books that haven't been published that I'm working on, and I'm not sure. I'm sort of, to be honest with you, I'm waiting. I'm waiting for democracy to continue.
All right, well, that's all we have time for. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you so much.